record so people can see this later. So it's now recording so people can see it later. Loyce Borgman works for the Brethren Benefit Trust. Many times when pastors and churches ask me questions, I get the answers from Loyce. So Loyce often makes Joe look good. So thank you, Loyce. And Brethren Benefit Trust manages a lot of my money and a lot of pastors' monies and churches' monies. They do a wonderful job, and they're going to tell us how to do it for ourselves on a day-to-day basis. So, Loyce.
One thing, Joe, I think, did you mention about the closed caption? I know you had talked with me about that.
I did not. Under more is also closed caption and full transcript. So if you click full transcript, it will type what everyone is saying along the side if you have a hard time with hearing, and it works pretty good.
Okay, thank you. It is good to be with you. I am connected by my phone because I am in rural Indiana, and sometimes I'll freeze. Hopefully it's in not too of a weird position, but sometimes it's when you're doing something you don't want to makes you look like your eyes are closed or whatever. But hopefully, if somehow we get lost, Joe has the PowerPoint and we'll work this out. But my phone connection usually stays stable, and so that's the reason I've connected by that way. As Joe mentioned, I work for Brethren Benefit Trust. I'm the Assistant Director of Client Relations. I work with our pension plan members and our retirement communities who are plan sponsors. I have my CRPC designation, which is a Chartered Retirement Planning Counselor, and got that certification. I've had it now 3 years. The session that I was asked to do way back was help. There's too much month at the end of my money. And as always, I waited till the last minute to go over it. And as I was going over it, I thought, you know, I've done this before, but I've kind of adjusted it, and I did a session that included a little bit more on it. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. And so it basically has the same information that was in that session, but just a little bit more. And this one is called Living Your Best Financial Life. I like my sessions workshop when I'm in person to be very interactive, but I'm not going to make Joe put us into small groups or breakout rooms or anything like that. I know a lot of us have attended webinars, and it tends to be a presenter presenting, and you just kind of listen along with the 100 other people that are on the seminar or the webinar. But I will be asking some questions, and while we won't be able to break into groups to discuss it, we'll give you some time just to maybe think about how you'd be answering it, and then encourage you to write it down, and maybe there's someone later that you want to discuss with. If you're married, some of these, involve talking to a spouse or kids, and we'll just go from there.
That's what. Can I hear nothing?
I don't know. You could watch it in English in here.
I know.
Are you okay, Joe? Oh, he's not getting, okay. So how do we live our best financial lives? There's 6 points that I want to cover tonight during our session. Goal setting, recognition of experiences and attitudes, putting finances into biblical context, budgeting, debt reduction, and credit score. We're going to first start with goal setting. So how do you know how to get where you're going if you don't know where you're going? That's a tongue twister, but think about it. You don't just hop in a car and start driving, do you? You need to know where you're going. You also don't start without knowing how much gas you have, if the oil's, check the oil before you go, right? You need to have an end destination, and you need to know if you have the resources to get there. So vision for the future, goals and financial plan. I encourage you to think about goals in 5-year increments. So think about goals for a year, then 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, beyond, and your will. And then you adjust and update as time goes by. Now maybe you have those 5 and 10 years and a major life event happens. Well, then even if you're just in the 3rd year, you start over, right, and do that. So the question I have for you to think about is, what are your short and long-term financial goals. So if you have a piece of paper, take a minute and write down what some of your short and long-term financial goals are. Then once you've done that, if you want to share in the chat feature, maybe Joe, if anyone shares, you can let us know what some of their short and long-term financial goals are. If you're comfortable sharing, I'd be glad to see kind of what some of your financial goals are. Any brave souls yet? I think I'd be seeing them too, right? Because I work with Brother and Pension Plan, I hope that one of your long-term financial goals is retirement. And if you're in a place of employment where they don't have a pension plan to offer, I encourage you to think about starting an IRA or something on your own, because retirement comes sooner than what you think. And it's important to be prepared for that. And also, too, I don't think people put in their financial goals the church and giving to the church. And I think that's always important to make those considerations also. Next point I want to talk about is recognition of experiences and attitudes. So if we were in person and you were all in a group, I would divide you into pairs. And these are some of the questions that we would talk about. What are your earliest memories of money in your family? How did your parents talk about money themselves and with children? And how well off did you feel growing up? And how did that change over the course of growing up, if at all? In my family, growing up, I never knew what my parents made. I didn't know what their income was. What I did know is that every 2 weeks, when my dad got his check, we would drive down to the Standard Steel and pick up his check, and my mom would go to the bank and cash it. And she would come home with a big envelope of cash. And then what she did is she had a bunch of envelopes out. One said church offering, and one said grocery money, and one said electric bill. And she would put money into each of those envelopes. That's the envelope formula. It's interesting because I tell my kids that, and they're like, what do you mean you cash a check and get money out? I mean, most of us now are looking at automatic deposit, right? We never see the cash. My daughter got a check from my parents the other day for her birthday, and she wasn't sure where to sign it or how to sign it. And I just thought that was interesting. Now, in my family, my husband's a pastor in the Church of the Brethren. And I don't know how your church operates, but in our church, his salary is known by everyone in the congregation. And so our kids know what my husband makes, which allows us, I think, to have more open and honest discussions. And then, of course, they want to know how much I make, and we talk about that. But it's interesting what we grow up with in our home, or how we experienced talking about financial matters. We tend to do that in our own families then when we have the next generation. When my husband and I were going through marriage counseling with our pastor before we were married, he said, now who's going to keep the checkbook and write the bills? And we both raised our hands. And I said, well, in my house, my mom does that. And he said, well, in my house, my dad does that. So we compromised, and he writes the checks and I balance the checkbook. Now, I can write checks too. I don't have to just do that with him. But it's interesting how what our experience is and how we saw things being done in our home of origins, we tend to translate that into our new homes. Now, I want to talk about some attitudes toward money. This is from a book called How Much Is Enough by Diane McCurdy. And she basically says there's 4 types of money attitudes for people. One is the spender, And you can guess what that is. They want to spend their money. They want to see material goods for their money. The second is a builder. And the builder spends money too, but not necessarily on physical things, but rather ideas or dreams. The giver will spend money, but it's never for themselves. It's for someone else, or it's for a good cause. The saver likes to save. Now, none of these are good or bad if they're in moderation, right? But the person who keeps spending, even if they don't have money to spend, that's an issue. And the person who is so miserly and tight-fisted that they don't share anything or don't do anything, that's the extreme of the saver. Now, I think why these are important is because there's different motivation behind them. And this can also work on a church board. Think about when you're in a meeting and talking budget. And, you know, Joe wants to get new carpet. Pastor David wants to build a youth program, right? Mary wants to give all of the money. She doesn't think any should be in the bank account. She wants to make sure it's all given to charity and the mission and the soup kettle. And then there's, you know, Bob, who wants to save the money. He doesn't, just for a rainy day. I just don't feel comfortable doing that. And I think if you start to understand that they're in this category, it makes it easier then to have conversation. And so I think you do this with your spouse or your kids in your family, but also I think you can use it in a church setting. And also, Joe, I don't know, did you pass out the resources I sent you? Or did those go to people?
The resource sheets are set at the end of this session. They will get a link for evaluating, and all of your resources and the slides will go to them. And they're also, when you have a break, there's a number of comments. They have started coming in.
Okay. I just want to say that there's going to be a sheet saying, are you a saver, a spender, a builder, a giver? It's, I think, an 8-page document, 6 pages maybe. And there's a quiz there. So if you're not sure where you come out on it, you can go ahead and take that quiz, but that'll be helpful reading afterwards. Okay, Joe, what are some of the comments or questions?
A number of people experienced poverty and not having enough money to spend. And several of our pastors experienced that. There's a goal from Circle of Peace, Linda, to manage a budget, become debt-free, and she's already retired. There's the thanks for having disability insurance, and from Pastor Phil, not remembering parents talking about money. And the cost of health insurance, and the having to decide whether to pay one bill or another bill, and having to, and I've experienced many of these same things also.
Right.
Okay, so that's a summary.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think people, we don't like to talk about money. It makes us uncomfortable, and especially as brethren, right? We're supposed to be a humble crew, and so those are hard conversations to have. One of the things that the Church of the Brethren has is a church workers assistance plan for BBT, and especially in this time of COVID, we actually had some special grants that we were able to make available. And if you're in the pension plan, your church may contribute to the church workers assistance plan. And it's hard for people to ask for help. I think we tend to think that there's people worse off than us, even if we're not in the best financial shape, because of the brotherness in us, that humbleness, it's hard to ask. So the next point I want to talk about is putting finances into biblical context. Now, we all know that you can take any scripture in the Bible, and the way you read it or the way you hear it, you can get it to kind of fit your point, right? But I want to talk about some of these statements here. The silver is mine and the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty. A person who is put in charge as a manager must be faithful. Remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. There's also a verse in Timothy that talks about money being the root of evil, but it's not money that's the root of evil, it's the love of money that's the root of the evil, right? And so having money is not a bad thing, or worrying about money is not a bad thing, or doesn't mean that you're not faithful. It's when you become obsessed with it or worship money, right? It's more, the money becomes more important than the people or what the money can do for others. There's also in your pack of resource going to be a front and back sheet of biblical financial principles. This is from a group out of Willow Creek, and it's the Freed Up Good Sense Ministry of the Willow Creek Church, which is in the Chicago area. I've attended their seminars, so that I could become a financial coach and help churches who wanted to start a program like Freed Up in their congregation as a ministry. Willow Creek sees it as a ministry. And there are a lot of references to money that they have in there. And I think it's interesting. If you have a chance to look at that later, it's just an interesting find. Next section I want to talk about is budgeting. And I would be interested, I can't see everyone, but I'd be interested for you to put your hand up if you use a budget. I'm not seeing how many hands, Joe. Are there hands or not? How many of you use a budget? Okay. So what is the difference between a budget and financial planning? Well, financial planning is a long-term look at your financial, hold on. Whoops, sorry, I'm going nuts here. Financial planning is a long-term look at your financial situation and how you want that financial situation to look in the future. Whereas a budget is the steps you're taking right now to achieve your long-term financial goals. We're going to talk about the budgeting process just a little bit. So basically what a budget is you're reviewing and tracking your spending, you're reviewing and tracking your income, and you're determining areas that must be adjusted to accomplish goals. And then you make the adjustments and you start the process again. So we're going to talk about review and track spending. As with anything, budgeting requires discipline. And most people don't want to do this. They will not do this. It's tedious, and after a day or so, it seems like it's a big nuisance that's worth our time. Most people find tracking everything inconvenient, but if you really need to look at your budget, what you're spending, what's going out, you need to keep track of everything. So if you run through McDonald's and get that coffee, you need to make sure that's included. If you run your kids through McDonald's to get a fast food meal, that needs to be included. You pay $5 to watch your daughter play basketball, that needs to be included. Then you also need to make sure you're identifying which is ongoing and which is emergencies after you track it. So what is an expense that you're going to have all the time? So if you need that coffee at McDonald's every morning to wake you up, then that's going to be ongoing, right? Or if for some reason you were driving late at night, you're tired and you just needed a coffee to keep you awake and that's not a normal for you, that's not a real emergency, but that would be under kind of emergency, not something that you do all the time. You also need to make sure that you're including your debit and credit card expenses because that's something that you're paying out, right? And then you need to find a tool and resource to help. Ultimately, you need a version that works for you. It can be paper. It can be as easy as keeping a notebook in your car with you or in your purse or your briefcase and just marking down everything that you spend. Or maybe there's an app. I'm sure there's apps out there on your phone that you can just plug in what you're doing. Find something that works for you. And I have a sheet of resources, and I also actually have a budget sheet that's part of your resources too, that if you really want to sit down and do a budget, there's a start of how to do that. And then I'm going to say garbage in, garbage out, right? If you're not putting everything in, then you're not going to be able to know what you're actually spending. And then don't make it too complicated. Try and find something that works for you that you're able to stick to. You know, monitoring for a month is great. If you can do it for 2 or even 3, that will give you a more holistic and realistic picture of your budget. Review and track income. That tends to be a smaller number of areas to track. But you need to be aware of frequency or other variations. So maybe you're in a job that is based on commission. So it may vary. Or maybe you're a teacher that only gets paid 9 months out of the year. So you just need to make sure that you're aware of that. I know with pastors sometimes, you know, they say, well, should I include funerals and weddings in my income? You know, that's hard to say unless you're a pastor who, you know, aims to get 1 wedding a week and you can really budget it, right? That's kind of income that comes in unexpected. And so therefore, I know you have to declare it, but therefore it really should not be money that you're counting on a regular basis. And then make sure your taxes and deductions are included and addressed. You know, just because your salary is $30,000, you're not bringing home $30,000. So you can't base a budget on $30,000. Uncle Sam's going to be taking out his money. If you're paying for insurance out of that, if you're putting money in your retirement, that all needs to be taken out before you know really what your budget is. Are there any questions? I'll pause a moment. I'm kind of flying through stuff. And then the moment of truth or reckoning, subtract the expenses from the income. If your expenses are higher than the income, start to figure out what to reduce or eliminate. And I think in one of the comments was you have 2 bills that are due. Which one do you pay? And that's a realistic issue for a lot of people, probably more than we realize or would like. And it really, if you're to that point, you need to negotiate with the creditors and see if there's a way to maybe pay less than what's due at the time to work it out. Not everyone's going to want to work with you, unfortunately. But hopefully you're in a place where that can happen. If your income is higher than your expenses, make sure you have a plan to save and invest. And you know, sometimes you may do this and you may say, wow, it says my income is $200 more than my expenses, but where is that $200 going? If you're really not using that money, it needs to go someplace, in a savings account, more invested in your pension. Need to find ways to save that money for a rainy day. Next, I want to talk about debt reduction. I think someone mentioned about wanting to reduce their debt and be debt-free. Warnings about debt found in the Bible. In Hebrews, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. And then from Proverbs, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender. And I think that's so true. When you're living with debt, you're not free to do what you want. And you don't have the choices, the freedom to make choices that you may want to make. So is debt unavoidable? Well, we know that living beyond our means is unsustainable. We might be able to do it for a month or 2 with the help of credit cards, but living beyond our means in the long run is not sustainable. Debt limits your options.
Yeah.
Debt
Sure.
adds stress on you and your family. Stress that you may not even realize. So I want to talk about debt. Is there good debt? I think there might be. When you talk about a
Yes, maybe.
mortgage loan. A mortgage loan is considered good debt because you're investing in something that hopefully will gain value. If not, at least you're hopefully not going to lose on it. Now, we've known that the housing market has crashed and that has happened to people. I'm living in an area now. Before living here in Indiana, we lived outside of DC. We were in a parsonage because housing was so expensive But if we had lived in a house, our property probably would have doubled by the time we left after being there 9 years, because that's what the housing market was doing in DC, outside of DC. In rural Indiana, we'll be lucky to get out of our house what we put into it, but it still feels like a good move. Student loans. That's debatable. You know, usually student loans used to be considered a good debt because it felt like you could come out with a college education and get a higher paying job than what you would have if you hadn't gone to college, but that's not the case anymore. Also, what's not the case is the amount of debt that our students are coming out with. It is not unheard of to hear students at Bethany coming to Bethany with $60,000 debt. And they want to be a pastor, right? And we all know that pastors' incomes are not going to take care of $80,000 debt, especially when they're just starting out. Bethany has started a program helping students learn how to get debt free. Auto loans. As soon as you drive the car off the lot, the minute you drive it off the lot, as soon as you turn that corner out of the lot, it's depreciated. Unfortunately, a lot of us don't have $40,000, $30,000 in the bank to buy a new car, or even $5,000, $6,000 to buy a used car. And so we find ourselves taking an auto loan. If you need to, take a loan as short as possible as you can. Don't spread out a car over 5 or 6 years. They do it, but it doesn't make sense. And then the last one is consumer loans, AKA credit card debt. And I would say that's never a good thing. It's getting into credit card debt becomes just a downward spiral that it's hard to get out of. Beware of the debt trap, especially consumer loans and credit cards. Now we're going to talk a little bit about credit cards, the good, the bad, and the ugly. They're easy to get. They may not be a good thing, but they're easy to get. They're easy to use. Again, that may not be a good thing. I'm saying these are the good things, right? Safer to carry than cash? Probably. You earn points or cash back. I love my credit card. I love it because I get points back. But I'm budgeting so that every month I'm paying that credit card off. It is very rare. In fact, I think I can count on one hand the amount of times that I've had to carry a credit card debt over. And I realize that's not the situation for everyone, but that's one of the things I've told myself when I use a credit card that I'm going to adhere to and stick to, because I don't want to get into debt. And it gives you a credit record. I have 3 children. One graduated from college last year. The other one is a sophomore in college this year, and I have a 9th grader in high school. My 2 older boys have credit cards. They're very minimum amount, but the reason we did that is for them to build a credit score. And we're going to talk a little bit later about credit score, but why that's important. But again, it needs to be able to be managed. And you need to make sure not everyone can have a credit card. Not every young person can have a credit card. I've heard horror stories of the kid go to college and he's buying pizza for his friends every weekend, and suddenly the parents are seeing the bills and the kid doesn't know what to do. The bad about credit cards, high interest rates and fees. You know, that's the fine print that you see at the bottom, right? Is those high interest rates. When paid late, interest rates can increase substantially up to 29%. And again, that's in the fine print, but if you miss a payment or two, they can jack your rates way up. It's easy to use and abuse. And it increases the amount you spend 12% on average. So think about this. You walk into a grocery store and you have $100 cash for your groceries that week. You probably have your phone and you have your calculator on, making sure that when you get to the checkout, your groceries are under $100. If it's not, you've got to put something back. On the other side, you go in with a credit card. And in your mind, you're going to spend $100. And maybe you're keeping track of it, but, well, you know, these crackers are 2 for $1. Or if I buy 5, I save $2. So I'm going to buy 5 because everyone likes the savings, right? You get up to the checkout and suddenly your bill is $120. do you put back $20 worth of groceries so that you're only charging your card for $100? Most of us probably don't do that. And so you can see where it's easy that the amount you spend is 12% more on average. One of the ways I found to help budget my groceries is we have a program at our school called Script. And the Script program, I think, is all over the United States. We use Great Lakes Script. But what I do is I buy gift cards for my grocery store in town. And so I buy $400 a month, and that's my grocery bill if my boys aren't home. If they are home, I probably need a little bit more. But I buy those cards, and then I go in, and that's how I shop. And so I'm earning also, the Script program allows me to get rebate money back. And so I'm giving myself back money and also contributing to the PTO at the school. But what that does is, even though it's a card, it has a certain amount on that I know I can spend. And so I'm watching what I'm spending. That's one way that I've been able to help budget without having to use cash in a grocery store. And then the ugly about credit cards. The mentality with credit cards is you spend it now and worry about paying it for it later. 29% of Americans, and this was 2013. I realized going through this I needed to update it, but it was too late for me to do that now. So I'm sure these numbers are a lot higher now. 29% of Americans admit to not paying all of their bills on time. And an $8,000 debt at a rate of 18% interest and a 2% rate payment will cost over $22,000, almost 3 times what you originally put on your bill. And that's when you're paying the minimum rate, okay? And the average amount of credit card debt per household where there is debt, and again, this was 7 years ago, was $15,112. Any comments on credit cards or using credit cards or taking loans?
I just want to say hi, and I do have a comment. Like you said, there's some good debts and could be bad debts, but I think car loan, house loan, school loan, that's something that mostly all of us, right now we do it because we don't have the money to to get those things that we want. But at the end of the day, we get the benefits back. If you graduate from school, you get your degree. You get a really high pay job, and also once you finish paying the loan, you can pay it back. So it's really this is really like the bad thing and the good thing, but we have to look at it as the good thing. If God will help us to pay the debts. Like it's not something bad, as I would say. But it's something for us. Like to keep going to the future, going towards our goals, if that's something we want to do at the lives, if you want to go to school for a sort of job, then we have to get a loan if you have the money, so something good, I would say that any loans like that, it would be something good for us, I mean, I'm not saying as Christians, but I'm saying like as everyone else, not as just as the brothers, in Christ, as everyone else, that's a good thing that God can provide with the loans. That's kind of like a help from God. I would say that.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, taking loans is not a bad thing. It's not a
Right.
negative thing. Overextending yourself on what you're taking out. And I think about that with college. Our oldest son, we drove him, I think my husband drove him 3,000, 4,000 miles across the country to look at schools. He wanted to go for engineering. He
Wow, that's
graduated
nice.
with an engineering degree. And he
That's
looked at
awesome.
Purdue because we're in the state of Indiana and it's a state school. And he was able to get, I think their annual tuition was $20,000. He also looked at Case Western next door in Ohio, smaller private school, also good in engineering, but their tuition was $40,000. Well, no, actually their tuition was $60,000, but they were going to give my son $20,000, as a scholarship or whatever. So he's looking at $20,000 versus $40,000 for a college education. And so we had that conversation about what going to Case Western would give him over going to Purdue. And the idea was that he liked the idea of being near a big city in Cleveland versus being in rural Indiana, where he's lived now most of his life, and going to Purdue, which he just thought of as a state school. He went down to Purdue and realized that there were a lot of smart people, and there were kids from all over the world coming to Purdue because their engineering program was so good. And they were paying a lot more than him because they were out of state. And so I think you're right. And the question is, do you need that $50,000 car if you're going to buy a new car? Or can you find a car that maybe has 10,000 miles on it that you can get more for 18,000 or 20,000? So I think you're right. I think loans are not bad things. It's just making sure you're weighing all the options, and maybe you want that $50,000 car and you figured it out and you can pay for it. That's good for you, right? I mean,
yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now we're going to talk about paying off credit card debt. And if you have credit card debt, you need to have a plan for doing that. And this makes it was kind of like reverse psychology for me, but your goal is to pay off your lowest debt card. So if you have a credit card that has $500 debt on it, and you have a card that has $1,000, and you have a card that has $2,000, you're making your minimum payments on all the cards. You have to make your minimum payment. You have to. Where you have that extra money, that discretionary income, money maybe that you can apply it to that $500 card first and get that paid off. The reason for that is a couple. One is it gives you a sense of accomplishment to get a debt paid off, right? And then once you've paid off that $500 card, you put everything that you were applying to that to the $1,000 card, and then get that one paid off. And then you're going to apply, when you get the $1,000 card paid off, you're going to apply that then to the card $2,000, okay? Keys to getting out of debt. You got to have a desire to be consumer debt free. If you don't have that desire, you're never going to get out of debt. Figure out what you owe. You've got to sit down, write down everything that you owe. Cut up those credit cards one at a time. You need to start paying down the credit cards and stop using the credit cards. Or let's say you've had multiple cards. Maybe you just keep one that you use, but everything else you've cut them up or stick them in the freezer and ice. Someone said they used to do that with their credit cards because by the time it thawed out, the whim to buy something was out of their brain. 4, take a hard look at your monthly expenses and lifestyle. Be willing to sacrifice in the short term to improve your long term. So let's say you enjoy eating out 2 times a month, but you have some bills that you need to pay. Maybe you don't eat out at all, or find a new way to have an eat out experience at your home. You're in California after all. It's nice weather there all the time, right? Not like here in Indiana where it's getting cold. Although we've had 70-degree weather, I can't complain about that this week. But it is going to take some sacrifice in order to get that debt down, to be debt free. Create a realistic budget and pay as much as you can toward the debt. Plan which will be paid first. Start a regular electronic savings deposit. Set up loan payments electronically. Review your credit report annually. Tips for avoiding debt. Eat healthy and exercise. Surprisingly, when you feel good, how that translates over to every part of our life, right? When you're in a good place, when you're grounded spiritually and emotionally, and you feel good physically, you're just in a better place. And that helps you from going out and doing the shopping or whatever you spend money on, right? That indulgence, if you're feeling good about yourself. Be a regular saver. Build up an emergency fund. Before the pandemic, they were saying you need about $300 in an emergency fund. That's still probably true. What has changed is before they said you need about 3 months worth of your expenses in emergency fund, 3 to 6 months. They're now rolling that to 6 to 9 months. And we can see it, right? There are people that are working in industries that aren't quite open all the way yet, and we're going on 9 months. And so those emergency funds, maybe they were in good shape before the pandemic hit. They had their 3 months saved up, but that quickly evaporated. If you use a credit card, pay it off each month. Like I said, I'm a big credit card fan. I like the fact that I get points. I also like the fact that it tracks my spending for me. It shows me what went towards groceries, what went towards gas. When I'm budgeting, I can look at that each month and know what I spent it on. Entertainment, it does the different categories for me. Store value card should be a wise option. I'm not sure that I totally agree with that statement. When I first got married, I got a job as a manager at a retail store at a mall in Florida when we were there. And I went into the store, and the first thing they said to me is, do you have a so-and-so, a Neiman Marcus card, or do you have a Belk card? And I said, no. Well, you know what? If you get to open a card today, we can save you 20%. Oh, that sounds really good. So I think that day I probably opened 4 store credit cards. Well, that dings my credit score, as you'll see a little bit later. But also now I have 4 cards that I have to keep track of and that I can spend on. So I'm not sure that I agree with the store value cards. Definitely if it's not a credit card, but it gives you points or rewards, then you definitely want to do the value card at the store, but not a credit card. Plan ahead and save for big purchases, Christmas and vacation club accounts. And how to opt out of credit direct mail. I'm also going to send you this PowerPoint. As I said, I have 4 people in my house that are over the age of 18, and I probably get at least 1 credit card solicitation each day in the mail for the 4 of us, right? So by the end of the week, I probably have 6 or 7 credit card solicitations. You can opt out of that. The last one is credit score. I want to talk a little bit about credit score. I think we're at 9:18. I think I can get through this, and then we'll still have time for question and answer. Your credit score is going to impact your mortgage and other loan rates. If you go into the bank to get a car loan or a mortgage loan or a school loan, they're going to look at what your credit score is. If your credit score is higher, they're going to give you a better rate. Also, surprisingly, premiums set by insurance companies, they also look at your credit score. I'm not quite sure why. There must be some reason for it, but they do. And it also could impact your employment, especially if you're in a financial environment or even at a retail store. They're going to look at your credit score. If you have a high credit score, they're going to say, this is someone that has their act together. I'm not going to have to worry about them stealing or finagling or doing anything. Whereas if you have a lower score, it might make them wonder what's going on. To have a good score, you must have credit history data that is reported. Having no history of borrowing means you will have a lower credit score. That's just the fact of the matter. And I have some people that say, I don't like credit cards, I'm not going to have any. That's fine, but realize that if you ever need to go and get a loan, you're not going to have a credit score and you're going to be paying more. I'm not saying that's a reason to get into credit, especially if that's something that you're against, but definitely is something to think about. And that's one of the reasons we've encouraged our boys to start with a small credit card to build up that credit report, that credit score, so that when it comes time for them to buy a house, or if they need to borrow more money for school, they have some sort of credit score. The score is based on the following areas, and some of these are really hard to nail them down on. It's almost like a secret sauce that they don't want to tell you about, but payment history usually makes up about 35%. Major derogatory, so if you're really late or not paying, that adds a lot to decrease your score. They look at debt level, 30%. They look at length of credit history, that's 15%. Diversity of credit accounts. And I'm not saying you need to have 5 different credit cards. I'm saying maybe you have a car loan. Maybe you have a mortgage. Maybe you have a Discover, and maybe you have a Walmart gift card or a Walmart, store card. Those are what they're looking at. That's what I mean by diversity. And the number of new attempts at getting credit, 10%. Why is that? Well, if they see you out trying to get credit cards, they're going to be suspicious about why you're doing that. Does this person need more money? Are they trying to get more access to more money? And so those, that's why that's 10%. How to improve your credit score. If your credit score is not where you want it to be, some of the things that you can do is pay your bills on time, keep your debt low. 10% of available credit limit is best, 50% is maximum. So if you have a credit card that you can spend up to $5,000, don't go above $2,500. Try to keep it, like the 10% would be $500. And don't apply for unnecessary credit. Review your credit report here. Close accounts responsibly. If you're trying to get rid of your credit cards, don't shut them off all at the same time. Spread it out monthly. It's not a good sign if you're cutting up all of them at the same time and closing everything. It's just one of those things that will ding your credit score. And have a mix of different types of credit. Again, that's the loans, that's the, mortgages, that's the credit cards. Recognize those names: Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, Innovis. These people will all provide you with your credit score. You can run one free one a year, and you could run one every 3 months. That's what I recommend. Run it quarterly to see what you're doing, especially if you're trying to increase it and you want to keep tabs on it. You can go to each of these and have them run your credit score. Now, Experian, I'm not liking Experian very much because I had a data breach with my material, with my name, happened to be the B, so my son and my husband and I were all affected. We had to freeze our credit, which is fine. It was no problem, but we decided to do that just to make sure that everything was okay. Then when we went in to get a mortgage, we refinanced. We had to unfreeze those for that to happen, and then we were able to freeze it again. Not a bad thing to freeze your credit score if you're not needing it. And it's very easy to unfreeze it and refreeze it. Okay, I'm through. I'm going to unshare. How do I do this, Joe? I'm going to stop share. Now I can see all your faces.
Hi there. I'm really glad that you've become a coach through Willowbrook. That's great to hear. Someone else who's done a lot of work in this area is David Ramsey. And some of what you shared, I mean, the principles, are kind of all the same. My oldest daughter has done a great job of roughly following Ramsey's principles, though she did buy a late model car that had 30,000 miles, and she's a nurse and she's living at home. So she'd already paid off her student debt and she'll pay off the car within 10 months. I know not everybody can do that. I know the question, well, two questions. Do you use Norton and LifeLock to help monitor to make sure that people aren't stealing your identity?
I have not. I was trying to think. Experian offered us something when they had the credit breach, but I can't remember if it was LifeLock or not.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was. And I worked for a congresswoman many years ago, and you might remember that, I don't know if you heard, but about 4 years ago, the entire database of the US government, everything that had been put in computers since the 1980s, was breached. And I was just bounced back and forth, and they said, well, apply online. And I said, that's where it started. I don't want to do that. So I just paid for LifeLock, and I think I might have Norton too. And they not only monitor it, but they can fix it. My other question for you as a coach is, and I know I have experienced this feeling for several years until I was recently able to take care of my debt situation for a reason I won't go into, but it was legal. Anyway, I know that I felt guilty about my debt situation. How do you as a coach talk to or work with people who already, it's a burden of debt, but there's also a burden of guilt because I'm a Christian and I'm not supposed to have this problem?
Right. It's tough because feelings of guilt or shame, maybe, really prevent people from seeking out help. And usually when people seek out help, they're at a really low point. And it really is just continuing to have those conversations and saying, let's think about how we got into this place. Like, how did we get here? And how do we move forward? You can't go back and change the decisions that you made, but you can go back and learn from those decisions that you made, right? And learn to do things differently. And a lot of times it is a cycle. I mean, how many times have I said to my kids, money doesn't grow on trees, right? I mean, that expression. And yet, if I don't talk with them about what the cost really is and what the ramifications are for how they spend their money, I mean, I think as parents, we don't, we want our kids to be in a better financial place than what we are. And we think, well, I'll help them out. And I think that's important, but also not giving them budget advice or not giving them money to manage as a teenager, not letting them see what the real value of what you're buying for them means, I think is a disservice to them. And I think with the guilt and the shame, I'm not sure that I answered your question, but I just think it's, especially, and I'm sure Dave Ramsey is the same way, the Freed Up Ministry, there's no place for that in what we do and what we work with, but it is a real emotion that you have to get over.
Right,
People,
and dealing with it, just real quick, one thing you mentioned does fit in with what David Ramsey shared, and my accountant shared it with me a while back, and that is paying off the less expensive ones. That's what Ramsey calls small steps. But each of those steps adds up. And as you go, hey, I did that. Now I'll do the next one. And it kind of builds positive motivation. I'll stop.
Right.
I don't know if other people have
well,
questions.
No, and if you're paying debt on 5 cards and suddenly you're paying debt on 4, you're paying more towards those 4. If you're paying more, you get down to 3 debts, then you're paying, I mean, it is a snowball effect. And then suddenly you get to the point where all that money that you're putting into credit cards is now yours to do something else with. And the question is, what do you do with that? And this is also, it's good to think about the person that mentioned having a car loan. You have a car loan, and let's say it's $420 a month, and you're paying that $420, and you get done with that. What are you going to do with that $420 now? Hopefully, now that's the other thing that my family did. My dad always, we paid off the car, and then he was getting another one. He had to continue. Me and my husband drive our cars until they don't run anymore. That's it, right? And so when we got to our church, they had mortgage partners at our church because they were trying to pay off a mortgage. Our church burnt to the ground. I'm at Manchester here, and that they had to build a new building, and they had mortgage partners. And we were coming to the end of where that was going to end. And my husband said to them, what are you now going to do with that money that you were paying to the mortgage partners? What other mission can we do? What other work can we do? And so you are going to have to make sacrifices to get those payment down, that debt down. But think about, and this is where you always got to reward yourself, right, along the way, because that's important too, especially if you're in it for the long haul. It's hard to do something for a long time and not get any reward. Now, paying down the debt is a good reward, right? But are there other things that you can do along the way? And one of those is dreaming about or thinking about what am I going to do with this extra money that I have? And how can it be used? Anyone else? Comments? Questions?
Yeah. You were talking about groceries, and I guess maybe this is just semantics. I don't know. But like that $100 you mentioned, is that like $100 on groceries a week? Or, cause I guess I just went grocery shopping the other night and it was like, $242, but I only go grocery shopping, like major grocery shopping, like once a month.
Right. Yeah, and I said I get $400 a month, and like I said, if my 2 grown sons are home, that changes. But I was just submitting that amount out. But what I do is it's a monthly budget, and I tend to also, I'm in a small town. The grocery store is literally like 3 miles away from me, so I'm not there every day, but I'm there probably 2 times a week, and I just use that gift card that I have, and it goes down. And I know what the balance is because it's printed out on the receipt. I don't know. I must have skipped through it. I must have been clicking and did that. But one of the things too that when you're thinking about budgeting is what is your realistic grocery? What what is the expectations for what groceries cost and what you spend and what you allow yourself. And so, yeah, I tend to do major grocery shopping every 2 weeks. I plan my meals out. That's the other thing that I do. I plan my meals out 2 weeks ahead. And I do major grocery shopping, 2 times a month usually, and then never fails that I get a recipe and somehow I ran out of garlic powder or whatever that I need, and so I call my husband and say stop at the grocery store and get this or whatever. But yeah, did that answer your question, Eric?
Yeah.
Also, I think Loyce was using 100 because it's easy to do percentages off of that as well.
That's right.
For instance,
That's
if you
right.
have 12% in your credit card, you spend $100, that's actually $112.
That's right. Yeah. And I didn't do it when I did that. It was a 12%, but it was the fact that if you don't have a certain amount that you need to stick to, it's a whole lot easier to put that extra on the credit card.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I
Anything
have
else?
a question. Can you hear me?
Yes. I
My
can.
name is Florecita, and I just wanted to know, like, how many credit cards do you, like, as an advisor, can recommend us to have?
That's a tough question. I have 2. I have a Discover card that I've had since college when I started. And the reason I use that is I get cash back. And I don't use the cash back. You can actually use that to buy other gift certificates. And so like I can buy Lands End gift cards with that and get, like if I pay $40, like if I've saved $40 in my Discover credits, I'll get a $50 gift card from Lands End. And I used to love to put my daughter in Lands End leggings and t-shirts because they were comfortable and they were durable. And so that's why I love my Discover card. My second card is the United card. And the reason I have that is because of my work, and my work expenses go on that card. The other night, for some reason, I was trying to get gas and my Discover card did not go through. And so I had my other card. So that's the reason I also have 2. One is to kind of keep expenses separate, but also because if one is not working at the time. And I'll tell you, I hate to carry cash. In fact, I don't carry cash because cash goes through my fingers. I don't know why. And part of it is I'm getting gas at a store and I'm thinking, oh, I'm really thirsty and I need some caffeine, so I'm going to run in and get a Coke. And if I have cash, I'll get that $1.99 bottle or whatever it is. If I don't have cash, I'm not going to put a $1.99 Coke on my credit card. And so, but now I do carry some cash. I kind of hide it away in my wallet because there's not many places are not going to turn you away with a credit card, even if it's a small purchase. I mean, you can go through McDonald's probably and buy a $3 meal on a credit card, right? But I have to go to my daughter's basketball games and they charge you cash and they don't take credit cards there. And so if I want to see my daughter play basketball, I've got to come up with the cash. And so I try and keep at least 20 in my wallet, but I tend to use credit cards for everything. And I tend to like credit cards because of that reason. I don't, like I said, I don't like the store cards. They get you that discount once and they may help out. I lied. I have a Kohl's card too, because you get special discounts with Kohl's. But I went from having probably, I don't know, 5 different stores to not just having the one store. And I don't know if that answers your question or not. I don't know that there is a right number. But you need to be able to, and if you have 2 cards and you say, well, I don't want the bill to be, you're paying off both cards, right? I mean, no matter what you put on each card, you're going to have to pay it off. So if your reason is, well, I like to spread out what I'm doing, yeah, I don't know. Others can maybe weigh in on what you think if there's a
I
perfect
had
number.
5.
I don't know.
I had 5, and as I was able to build down my credit, I was able to go to 3. And all of them, except as I put in a chat where I charged 4 brakes on my minivan that I'll pay off in 2 or 3 months. I guess I do have care credit also, but I'm able to pay off my wife's oral surgery over 10 months at 0% interest. But if it
Yeah.
goes more than 12 or 18 months, then it's 25%. So you have to stay
Wow.
on it. So I have 3 financial plus care credit. My wife has a Kohl's card. She pays some charity missionary monthly donations on her card, but she is very grateful that she's able to pay it off every month.
Yep. Yep.
So it's kind of what your needs are within limits.
Right. And
Thank
Joe, I
you.
see we're at 9:30. You're welcome. I see we're at 9:37, and it very much said to me, you need to be done and off. So,
Right, yeah. So I need to go to the next event.
Okay.
Some of you are going to be on that one also. So,
thank you all. And Joe, send along my email address. You know what it is. If you have any questions or comments, and also look at the PowerPoint, because I know now I missed some slides, because I also talked about kind of one of the things that Dave Ramsey does when he does his budget is he includes tithing in church. And some of your other ones are not going to include that, like your consumer report budgets. They don't really put in the tithing aspect. And I think Dave Ramsey, coming from his religious background, definitely, and I think that's important, that tithing, whatever that is something that you include and budget for too. So thank you all so much for allowing me to do this and giving me the grace. I've not done a session online before, so this was a new experience, but thank you all so much. And I commend your conference for doing this. It's just tremendous. You guys are amazing. Wow, what an undertaking for the Pacific Southwest. Good job.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
sharing it with us.
Yes. Good night.
good night.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.
Good
You're
night, guys.
welcome.